Hi, everyone. This is David Taylor from the Effective Writing Center. And it's really great to be with you in your Government 101 class today. Your professor was very kind to offer to us a model paper written by a previous student on this assignment that you are working on for Government 101. And so what I wanted to do today was to go over the assignment instructions, the grading rubric, and then see how those assignment instructions took shape in written form in a paper that got a very high score. So in other words, if your paper looks like, sounds like, reads like, and contains the same elements as this model paper, you're probably going to do pretty well. Okay, let's take a look first at the assignment directions. First, we're going to look at the assignment instructions because they, of course, are the keys to what Professor Kingsburg wants you to deliver in this paper. Let's read them together. For your final project, select a philosopher that we've studied during this course and explain how his or her writings help us to grasp one or more specific issues in contemporary politics. And so contemporary is the key word there. It must be happening today or very recently. For example, if you select Plato, you could write about how his work helps us to understand problems of justice today or contemporary justice. Be sure to include relevant passages from the readings and at least 3 secondary works from academic books or journals. Now, the relevant passages from the readings is one set of sources you must have, but you must also have at least 3 works from academic books or journals from the library that you also cite. And if not from the library, then certainly from Google Scholar, which also databases peer-reviewed academic books and journals. Now, your thesis statement is also something that Professor Kingsburg is requiring. As we make our way through the readings and discussions, think about possible paper topics. You can email me with your ideas and you will be given feedback. Your paper must have a thesis. The thesis is one of the things that you're going to be working on with my colleague Kevin Follier in this workshop. And he's going to be taking you through some of the resources that we've designed to make sure that your thesis statement meets the criteria set out by Professor Kingsburg. Now, this final project is due on July 9th. It is 20% of your grades. It's 1,000 words long, and those 1,000 words refer to the body pages, about 4 double-spaced type pages with those standard APA settings. And Professor Kingsburg is giving you 4 points for participation in the workshop with Kevin. As we mentioned, your paper should have a minimum of 3 outside sources, 1 primary, and that would be the book that you are reviewing in the course. For example, in the sample paper, it is Machiavelli's The Prince, and then 2 other secondary sources, at least, by the way, that's a minimum, from those academic peer-reviewed journals and books. And Kevin will be going over the APA style that you need for in-text references. APA uses parenthetical, or that means inside the sentences, for your in-text references, not footnotes, which you find in papers written in the discipline of history. Now, a word about encyclopedias and dictionaries. As the professor points out here, they are not appropriate for use as sources in your paper. However, encyclopedias and dictionaries are a great place to start in order to get an overview or fill your head with background information on the issue or work or philosopher that you are encountering. However, that information is for your background knowledge only. You're not to use them in your paper. Citations, again, we're going to be going over this in depth. Anytime you use an outside source, it must be cited twice. Once as an abbreviated in-text citation, and again as a full reference citation on the last page of your paper. Professor Kingsburg gives you some very specific instructions about quotations, and he does want you to limit your use of quotations. More importantly, he also wants you to, if you're going to give a quote, to at least Introduce that quote and follow up on that quote with analysis of your own. In other words, you want to avoid the error known as the dropped quote. The dropped quote is a quotation that is not introduced and not followed up on by the student's own analysis and wording. Let's take a look next at the grading rubric. The grading rubric provides, I think, some really interesting insights into what you are to deliver in your final paper. As you can see here, Professor Kingsburg wants you to have that thesis statement in your introduction. So we're going to be making sure, as Kevin works with you, that that thesis statement is clearly stated as part of the introduction of your paper. In the body of your paper, you want to show off. You're going to show off by providing your in-depth analysis of the topic. Whenever you make a key point stated in your own words, you want to develop that key point by your own analysis, but also by referring to your sources. Again, that includes the primary source, the book by the philosopher you are using, as well as secondary sources. And again, we want to point out that Professor Kingsburg says that your paper can consist only of 15% or less direct quotations. Let's go ahead and take a look now at the model paper. I think you're going to like it. It is an excellent representative of the kind of thing that Professor Kingsburg wants. The first thing you'll notice is that it is in correct APA style, and that means that it has a running head at the top. Now, the running head on the first page is different than the running head on the rest of the pages in that it includes the word running, the word head, and a colon after it. Then comes the shortened title that is in all caps. That shortened title doesn't have to be the entire title. You want just a little slug there that properly identifies each page as belonging to the same paper. APA's rule is that the shortened title is to be 50 characters or less. And each page is numbered, including the title page. Now, you're going to be taking a look at a video that shows you exactly how to set up your APA title page and every other part of your paper. Here you see the student is using a main title together with a subtitle. Whenever you have a main title and a subtitle in APA, you separate them with a colon, which you see here. George W. Bush's War on Terror, colon, a truly Machiavellian policy, and then there's the name, course number, and date. And that's what the professor wants on your APA title page. No abstract for your paper. You go right into the body of your paper, and that means that on the first line of your first body page, you repeat your full title. Again, if it includes a title and a subtitle, they are separated by a colon. Also notice that we have now dropped the words running head for our running head, and again, the video will show you how to do that. Okay, let's begin reading the paper. Do President George W. Bush's War on Terror and the Bush Doctrine, which supported it, deserve the label Machiavellian? It may appear so if one considers Bush's decisiveness in initiating military attacks on Afghanistan after September 11, 2001, his willingness to make a preemptive strike against Iraq, his policy of enhanced interrogation of enemy combatants, and his insistence that his policies were consistent with the high moral standards for which the United States stands. So that's a really compelling opening paragraph. Keep in mind that your introduction section can consist of more than one paragraph. Here, the student does indeed do that because this opening paragraph simply raises the overall question that the paper is going to answer. Gets your attention, sets the context, sets the stage for this next paragraph, which is also part of the introduction and which contains that thesis statement. Let's read it. Reading Machiavelli's The Prince more closely, however, it is clear that his position was more nuanced than it first seems. Machiavelli advised his prince to study all the factors involved in occupying another country, especially one with a different language and culture, so he would be able to maintain the support of the people and avoid becoming hated. Machiavelli also analyzed in detail the power relationships involved in international conflicts to arrive at a realistic and sober assessment of the likelihood of success of a given policy. In contrast, so first we did Machiavelli, and now we have a great transition phrase there to link the parts of the paragraph together. In contrast, Bush became blinded by his ideology, not seeing the possible vulnerabilities of his strategy of preemptive war and unilateral action. And now comes the thesis statement. Although the Bush administration's conduct of the war on terror was an example of some aspects of Machiavelli's thinking on political leadership, it failed to consider Machiavelli's advice concerning the unforeseen consequences of a foreign occupation, including the difficulty of maintaining popular support. And there is the thesis statement, the overall controlling idea that will be proven, illustrated, and corroborated throughout the rest of the paper. Excellent job. Now, I also want you to notice how the author, the student, is now using APA Level 1 subheadings to divide the major sections of his paper. APA Level 1 subheadings are centered, bold-faced, and each major word, as well as always the first and last word, are capitalized. Now, let's read this first section. Machiavelli, 1998, was a realist. Now, that word, Machiavelli, the author's name, in 1998, are what is called an in-text citation. All APA in-text citations consist of at least the author's last name and year of publication. Sometimes the author's last name is in parentheses when it's completely parenthetical. Sometimes it is part of the student sentence. So we can go to the references page at the end, and we can look under the M's, and we can expect to find the full and complete reference citation, and there it is. Machiavelli in, you never use first names in APA, period 1998. And we see that it is a reprint of an original work. So there is an example of an in-text citation to the primary source. Machiavelli, 1998, was a realist. He wrote in The Prince that in order to be useful, he wanted to express the, quote, the effectual truth of the thing, end quote, rather than speaking of what should exist. He, Machiavelli, urged his prince to focus on military preparedness as his highest duty for the preservation of his state. And that reference is to page 59. We don't have to repeat anything else because we already know that he refers to Machiavelli. And the rule in APA is once you give the date in parentheses of a work, you no longer have to give that date in the rest of the paragraph. Bush's national security strategy, released 1 year after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, echoed this idea, stating that, quote, it is time to reaffirm the essential role of American military strength. We must build and maintain our defenses beyond challenge. And then comes the in-text citation for that quotation. And that in-text citation is completely inside parentheses, and notice that the period for the sentence comes after the parentheses, not before. We also know that we can now go look under the N's on the reference page and find the full and complete reference citation. And there it is, National Security Council. There's the NSC to refer you to the initials, and there's the full and complete reference citation. Okay, let's go back and continue reading. Machiavelli, 1998. Now, because we're in a new paragraph, we also must repeat the 1998 date of publication as part of this in-text citation here. But we only have to do it once. Machiavelli, 1998, was primarily interested in a prince's ability to maintain power and wrote that to avoid danger, he must rely on his own armed forces. And there is a page number to that specific place where that idea can be found. It used to be in the APA 5th edition that you only used page numbers for a direct quotation. However, in the 6th edition, writers are encouraged to always use page numbers, whether it's a paraphrase, summary, or direct quotation. Furthermore, Machiavelli emphasized that preemptive strikes were sometimes necessary, explaining that the Romans, quote, knew that war may not be avoided, but is deferred to the advantage of others. So they decided to make war with Philip and Antiochus in Greece in order not to have to do so in Italy. Pages 12 through 13. Here is an error. Because there is more than one page, there should be more than one P. By the way, the lack of spacing after some periods has to do with how this document translated into my Microsoft Word program. It is not an error on part of the student. Bush favored unilateral action, according to Dobell, 2010. You see, that's an in-text citation. That is all that is needed. The author's name and year of publication, and, in a second, the page number. Because he, Bush, saw alliances as limitations rather than advantages, page 70. In a speech to West Point graduates, Bush, 2002, June 1, reminded them that, quote, we must take the battle to the enemy, disrupt his plans, and confront the worst threats before they emerge. If we wait for threats to fully materialize, we'll have waited too long, para 18 through 19. So what you're seeing here is an in-text citation that includes this June 1, and because it is a type of source that does not have page numbers, the author included the paragraph numbers, which you must do for a direct quotation. Let's go look at the full and complete reference citation. We'll go to Bush 2002 on the references page. And you see that it is to a website, H+P George Bush White House Archives. And that June 1 is there because there was obviously more than one archive done during 2002. Let's continue reading. The student author concludes the paragraph with a great follow-up to the quote. His preemptive attack on Iraq the following year made good on this statement. Next paragraph. Machiavelli, again, because it's a new paragraph, we have to repeat the year of publication, advised his prince to, quote, learn to be able not to be good, page 61, because it's a quotation, when it was necessary for his political survival, but also insisted that he must, quote, appear to have all the good, virtuous qualities that people expect in a leader, and that's page 70 of the Machiavelli source. Bush's September 2001 directive to the military carefully spoke of the humane way enemy combatants were to be treated. And notice we're using the same format for the in-text citation, 2001, November 13th, because it has a specific date. And we're also referring to paragraph numbers because as a website, it does not have page numbers. But Galchinsky, 2013, noted that in practice, terrorists were not treated as legal persons according to international law, page 225. Sulks, 2008, detailed how prisoners at so-called black sites and at Guantanamo underwent torture, both physically and psychologically, page 592. So you can see that this student author very clearly has strong sources to back up his claims that Bush did not follow Machiavelli's advice. And if we go to the references page, we will find Galchinsky and Sulks, and you'll see that they are academic sources. The Galchinsky is from the peer-reviewed journal International Studies Perspectives, and the Stoltz reference is from the peer-reviewed journal Psychoanalytic Dialogues. Excellent use in that one paragraph of both primary sources and secondary sources. Notice how the student author follows up. Bush did neither in Iraq, and Machiavelli's prediction was borne out, as Khalidi 2006 described in the great difficulty the U.S. had in rebuilding the country after occupying it, page 127. And again, Khalidi would be an academic reference. Machiavelli, 1998. Now, I crossed out 1998 because the author didn't need it, because 1998 had already been mentioned once in the paragraph, and you only need to mention the year of publication of a source once in a paragraph. Machiavelli further cautioned his prince against allowing a powerful nearby country to gain influence in the newly occupied state. That's on page 11 of Machiavelli's The Prince, at least that edition. However, the Iraqi Shias, with which the U.S. worked, promptly were allowed to ally themselves with neighboring Iran, a predominantly Shia country. So notice how the student author is doing a good job of pointing out when and when not Bush's strategy coincides with the advice given by the political philosopher Machiavelli. Machiavelli, we repeat the year, believed that the successful prince had to take into account all the various political forces and interactions involved in a situation, as he described in King Louis's unsuccessful occupation of Italy. Again, the student left out the double P. If you have more than one page, you must have more than one P. Bush thought that once the Iraqi regime had been changed, democracy would flourish in Iraq and throughout the region, but it was not that simple, period. Now, that is the student author's claim, that is the student author's analysis, and now the student author will back up his claim, back up his analysis with academic sources. The first one is Khalidi, 2006, concluded that Bush's goals in Iraq were unrealistic and would ultimately fail to be realized. Khalidi further predicted the possibility of a divided Iraq suffering from civil war and sectarian violence. Give us our double P's and we'll be great to go. A prediction that has now become a reality. And the student author doesn't use just one academic source, he uses another one. According to Ambrosius, 2006, Bush's mistake was to fail to see the possible unintended consequences of his policies, page 536. And now we conclude the paragraph in the student's own words, showing the student's own summary and understanding. Bush's ideological commitment to reshaping the Middle East in an American mold prevented him from making a realistic Machiavellian assessment of the entire situation. Clearly, the student has made his point throughout this paragraph. Now the student concludes the essay. Conclusion. There are parallels between President George W. Bush's conduct of the War on Terror and Machiavelli's advice in The Prince. Bush's realism and reliance on the use of armed force, his willingness to make preemptive military strikes, his emphasis on ends rather than means in the interrogation of enemy combatants, and his attempts to frame his actions in the moral context of a global struggle for freedom are all reminiscent of Machiavelli. However, great transition, that's called a pivot point in the paragraph. However, Bush, paid less attention to Machiavelli's warning about the importance of maintaining the support of the people whose country was being occupied, and of having a good grasp of all the interactions between states, groups, and people in a military campaign. Though it initially seemed successful, Bush's War on Terror undermined worldwide respect for the United States, further destabilized the Middle East, and failed to achieve the long-term goal of strengthening the national security of the United States. Be sure to put your references page on a page all by itself, and you do that best by clicking on Insert at the top of the page, as you will be shown in the video, clicking on Insert, and then clicking on Page Break. That will be sure to keep your references page on a page by itself. One slight error the student made here, the word references is not boldfaced in APA. Other than that, this student clearly used a citation machine or is somehow an expert in APA, because all of these citations are excellent, and you will be provided instruction by Kevin on how to format your APA references. Okay, thank you very much for watching and listening to this review, and I'm sure it's going to help you with this final project that is, remember, worth 20% of your final grade.